So who am I speaking with?
My name is Mike McDerment. I'm co-founder and CEO of FreshBooks.
And Mike, what you were talking about was the early days of FreshBooks when you were trying to acquire users through advertising, and well, you didn't know what you were doing right or wrong. Explain those early days.
Yeah, so there I was in my parents' basement, buying ads in email newsletters, Google AdWords, stuff like that. And people were showing up and becoming customers, but I had no idea if we were being effective with our advertising. I knew how much it cost. I just didn't know, is that a good cost or a bad cost? And that's what we talked about today.
So let's go down. You actually looked at 3 different ways to look at whether you're being effective or not, but it didn't really answer the question fully of effectiveness because there were variabilities. Can you kind of walk through each one and explain the pros and cons?
Sure. So the first thing to know is that I was giving the talk from the point of view of a subscription-based application, like a SaaS app, because that's what I run. And I walked through a bunch of metrics that are really important to monitoring your performance with that kind of thing. But once that was all established, I talked about 3 different ways to measure your effectiveness of your marketing. So first one was like months to get a payback, which is just how many months of revenue, like average revenue per user revenue, did it cost to acquire a customer? And then we looked at, how much am I spending to acquire a customer in terms of lifetime value? And then
explain that lifetime value, because I don't know if anyone's going to understand. Sure. What's that?
So lifetime value is effectively like if you get a customer today and you know they're going to pay you this much every month and you know they're going to stay for this many months. So let's say they paid me $50 and they stay for 20 months. My lifetime value is $1,000. Okay, so when I get a customer, I can be really excited. If I get 80 customers today, I just created $80,000 of lifetime value for my business. So yeah, the metric is looking at how much you spend to acquire a customer in terms of that lifetime value. So am I happy to spend 15% on $1,000, $150, or 50%, which would be $500? And it's kind of a sliding scale depending on what you want to do in terms of growing the business.
And then the very last thing, which is a little complicated, and I don't know if you can sort of explain it in a nutshell, but you don't have to go through the math of the equation, but explain the last one and why that's valuable, really only if you can sort of sustain the business for a while.
Okay. And so it's not even sustain the business, it's sustain your spending. So the last ratio was, it's called the CAC ratio. You can read about it online. It's developed by a venture capital firm, the Bessemer, and they invest in a lot of SaaS companies. And they're sort of pioneers. And they developed this metric which would basically take, the simplest way to look at it is your quarter over quarter revenues and compare them based on the marketing you spent in the previous quarter. And the net result is you get some sense of how effective your spending was. And that's really important. That's what I was looking for when I was in the basement because I was spending dollars. I just didn't know if it was effective. I didn't know where I was.
What I thought was really interesting though is the first time you looked at that ratio, it was like off the charts fantastic. You're like, oh, I'm doing great. And then you watch it slowly lower down. Explain why that phenomenon happens.
So yeah, I gave a little case study in my presentation where the first couple months of the case study spent no dollars. And what happens with the CAC ratio is you really need a certain number of months with consistent advertising or marketing spend so you can have a baseline to compare quarter over quarter. Because if you start with nothing, if you're familiar with math and denominators, a small denominator in terms of marketing will have a big impact on the number you get at the top. And so in the example I gave, basically for the first 3 months of this case study, people were not spending enough to get a real number. And so CAC ratio, if you're building one of these businesses, you need to have a longer period of time of consistent spending before you can start to calculate it and get meaningful numbers. And that, funnily enough, to tie things together, the 3 metrics I gave, there's a progression when you're building a subscription-based business on how, which metric you should use to measure your effectiveness based on what stage you are in the business. So that was part of my talk.
Very, very last question, and I just overheard you say it. What's your feeling about engaging and spending money in social media in those early days?
In those early days, it's low cost and you can get out there, but I think there's a great hullabaloo going on about social media, which I would like to call bullshit on, frankly. We find that email is 100 times more effective than a tweet. And so people feel good because this stuff's out there, but in terms of moving a business, social media does not compete in our experience with things like even Google AdWords or email marketing and things of that nature.